Today's episode consists of 2 interviews I did with the authors for M20 Sorcerer, who did most of the affiliations, which is the name for the sorcerers groups within the book. There's another episode that will be coming out this week talking about the mechanics of using linear magic, and that'll be a separate episode, as I neither wanted to do 3 weeks of Sorcerer, nor did I want to jam all the explainers into one very long episode. Thanks to everyone who participated in the feedback period for M20 Sorcerer and helped make the book the best it could be. Link to Drew's and Bek's other work are in the show note, as well as a link to the M20 Sorcerer's Drive-Thru RPG page. After this week's bonus episode, our next episode is going to be Operative's Dossier, and then we'll be back to a Tomes of Magic episode roughly every 4 weeks until we start Sorcerer's Crusade. And with that, on with the show. Hi, Mage fans. This is your host, Terry Robinson with Mage the Podcast, and joining me today is yet another person who helped make M20 possible. I am joined today by Drew Kaye, who you may know from Occultist Anonymous, and when I think magetheascension, I don't think Drew. No. But when I think Mage in general, I do. It's kind of closer to the blue rather than the red end of the spectrum. So, Drew, what was it like writing for the other Mage?
Bizarre. It was really kind of wacky to dig into books that I literally have never opened. And I got a really fun perspective of here's a ton of stuff, all these affiliates that we'll talk about. Getting to read this new content and go, cool, let's take what exists, let's update it, let's make it new, let's add some 2020 at the time. 2021, whenever I wrote this thing, vibes to it and update some stuff and bring some stuff that was talking about, in the future of the year 2000, and instead be like, hey, we passed that. So yeah, that was a lot of fun. And then of course, hey, it's my first official writing gig for really reals.
You didn't do the Nephite Priests to the best of my knowledge, but what was it like writing for a game that had metaplot? Like the Thalhun and the Star Council have been through some shit.
Everyone, I've been talking to my coworkers and explaining the weirdness that what I wrote, and I was like, oh yeah, the Thalhun. It's totally not magic, guys, but we do have these crystals, and we do say magic words, but it's totally science. Thalhun was fun. The Seven Thunders were even more fun because they're the ones who were all set for the apocalypse. They were all set for the turn of the millennium, and now it's 20 years later, and I went kind of hog wild with them and went, guys, the apocalypse isn't here. What do we do now?
Let's dive into it then. You did a number of the affiliations, which is the term that we use in Sorcerer to describe a group that's sorcerers. Let's go through them, what you think about it, how to use it. The first one you did was the Ancient Order of the Aeon Rites. Who are they and what's neat about them?
In my mind, and they're the hey, we're the good guy sorcerers. We're here to take care of humanity and fix them up. And we learn magic stuff so we can do that. And they kick people out who are not good with a capital G in there, and super hermetic, very in the smoky back room kind of ritual cast kind of folks with a plan for humanity. And then I threw in at the end but are they being manipulated by some ancient mage or sorcerer who's lurking in the shadows since 1873?
Yeah, which is hardly ancient, but is still pretty good.
Yeah.
It's better than most people can manage.
Right.
What is the thing that you think is super cool about them?
I actually really like them because they are good guys. I like, especially when you talk about the grungy world of Darkness, or Chronicles of Darkness, where I'm from, where everything is kind of creepy, everything is kind of dark, and then having some folks who are like, no, we are going to do good. You have to look at the idea that they are manipulating humanity, so there is some questions of the goodness there, but they're fun just to actually be good people, and these are the sneaky folks. And so you can play with some of that whole, you don't get to see everything because you are on the outer circle and then the inner circle and then that final middle 3. And then maybe once you're dead, you become a secret watcher. And this whole, there are levels, there's progression. That really sets up for me a really cool, as players, delving deeper and deeper into stuff.
Yeah, it's kind of like a microcosm of almost the way the Hermetics would like to see the traditions work, in that you have this hierarchical group that has a secret plan to shepherd humanity. And it's interesting to see mortal sorcerers kind of recapitulate it. It's like when you hear someone else retell a movie or something and you're like, oh, that's what you got from that. The Ancient Order of the Aeon writes is like, oh, that's what we look like, says the Hermetic Master. Again, you have the Secret Masters, the Secret Watchers, which I don't remember as being in previous books. So if that's a new thing, cool. If you brought it back to us, also cool.
Yeah, they were a little one-line thing.
Oh, okay.
And then I was like, let's build that up, because I mean, I come from the storyteller background. And it's like, all right, here's some plot hooks. Here's some let's build this out. Like, are the Secret Watchers real? Are they manipulating the Ancient Order of the Aeon rights? And then I threw in, of course, I mean, it's 2020, and hey, yes, the new generation of mages, sorcerers are coming in going, hey, we're not all cool with this whole upper rank, upper echelon. Let's get some transparency. And yeah, so I threw some turmoil in there.
So the next group you did was the Arcanum, and of the groups listed here, I think they are the one that by far we have the most information on, in that they got their own book, kind of. So what was it like updating the deeply storied Arcanum? And I think you took it kind of in an interesting direction.
Yeah, I totally did not look at these people and go, oh, it's the Mysterium from Mage the Awakening. This was, for me, like a lot of fun to break out. Again, and this is the sister order in my head when I was writing this to the Aeon rights, because Aeon rights are like, oh no, we want to make humanity better. The Arcanum is, we are getting knowledge. We don't care what it is. We don't care where it's from. We're going to collect it up and we're going to make it useful, and then break it out into these different lore houses and their different libraries, and create these kind of cells of researchers and stuff like that. And it was a lot of fun. I definitely wanted to get more into the history, and I realized, no, I don't have the word count for that, and I've got to throw the history out, because that was the only way I could actually get all the details of how they proceed and how they interact with one another and how they do research.
And what was the 2020 spin that you feel you put on them? As you mentioned, Halls of the Arcanum was a full-flown 120-page book or so. So how did you update the Arcanum?
The big thing was kind of breaking out, and I'll admit I don't 100% remember all the little changes, but I do remember kind of breaking out and trying to create a different organization to them, as I did with quite a few. And like I mentioned with Aeon rights, the younger generation is showing up and they're like, hey, why do we do these things? Or in some cases, hey, let's dig into some additional research. They have the existing colleges like Thaumatology, Hermetic Studies Program, and School of Mytho-Arcology. Actually, whole point I tried to add to this was nudging the idea that, yeah, there's a lot of stuff out there, and maybe we should dig into more stuff other than what we're used to doing. Kind of break out of the hermetic kind of mode of like, hey, there's other stuff out there that we could look at that doesn't fall into our neat and tidy books and scrolls category of stuff.
One of the themes that comes through is, one, this kind of gives you a sorceress organization that is big enough to be your, in air quotes, world-spanning conspiracy or world-spanning organization. Again, it's a sorceress microcosm, maybe of the technocracy or the Euthanatoi or another group that has people everywhere and you just have to know how to get in contact with it. The other interesting thing is Arcanum membership is not secret, and academics may be reached out to, and maybe people aren't entirely sure what the organization does, but this is one of the rare cases where there is a public-facing aspect to the kind of secret conspiracy that is the World of Darkness. Also, kind of the history and makeup of it kind of lets you make it be like a supernatural fraternity.
Mm-hmm.
In the sense that these are people that go out, and it's not unreasonable that someone says, yeah, you can join, but you and your 3 buddies need to come back with a crystal skull.
Yes, actually, you mentioned that, but yeah. Indiana Jones was some big vibes here of like, yeah, Indiana Jones, not a sorcerer, absolutely a member of the Arcanum. 100%, he's got grants from the Arcanum.
Previously, they were so steeped in history and so on. You're like, well, I don't have space for that. So what do they look like now, again, to an outsider? What kind of stories do you feel the Arcanum is super good at telling or exploring?
These are the people who randomly show up, and it's this guy in a nice tweed suit who looks like a professor and says, "Hi, I heard you were into such and such a thing, and I have the money to outfit an expedition to this unknown place that you want to go dig up ruins from. Here's the money, go at it." I cannot remember the name of the guy, but who is in Atlantis in the movie with Milo Thatch and stuff like that. And yeah, no, I've got the crew, I've got the giant submarine, let's go find Atlantis. But with an emphasis on who the hell is this guy and where does he have all this money from? Because he's just a nobody that you don't know, who just shows up, hands you a business card that's got his name and his phone number on it, and says, "Call me when you're ready to reveal the mysteries of the universe." And you go, "Who is this guy? We like him, but we also have no idea about him." And then you can kind of use that as an NPC to bring your players into the Arcanum, or just a guy who randomly shows up and you can literally throw a plot hook at your players going, "Hey, he shows up again." It's the start of Jurassic Park where he flies in on a helicopter and goes, "No, you're going to want to hear about this."
So the next group that you did was the Bala Moab. And to me, this was always interesting because the opening fiction to one of the Sorcerer's books is an AOAR person talking to a member of the Bala Moab and them just being like, boring. Who are they and what are they doing in 2020?
Yeah, they're Mesoamerican warrior priests. And I did try to lean into that idea of them being warrior priests, bringing in ritual of bloodshed of their own or others, especially their own for them. I really dug into the vision trances where they go into the other world, the Umbra, as kind of universally known, and having these really interesting dreams to meet the world tree, getting to meet up with, I believe it's a snake. Also, because they are Mesoamerican, let's bring in the fact that they dealt with imperialism. And so they have been hiding for a long time and now are starting to kind of nudge out. And they are still fairly insular as opposed to some other affiliations, but they are very Mayan focused and they are very indigenous focused, and they're taking care of their people, and they are not worried about any kind of organization the way the previous two affiliates were, and are more territorial and taking care of their people and very, very tribal in the my people kind of idea, which, you know, has the father knows best kind of vibe sometimes with them dealing with their people. I also kind of like them because they don't judge one another. Once somebody's a full shaman, they do their thing and you don't get to criticize. You just have to watch as they start to chat and have conversations and start making pacts with darker spirits and things. Hang on, you probably shouldn't be. Maybe not. Never mind. I have to shut my mouth because I'm not supposed to criticize you.
Shaman gonna Shah. The other neat thing is kind of the way it's phrased, though. You make mention of Xibalba, the kind of one of the terms for the Mayan otherworld, the place of fright. You don't necessarily say that it's the Umbra, just that other spirits can come from a number of places. And one of the things this book does that I thought was kind of annoying at first that I actually appreciated later on is it's real light touch with the Umbra. It doesn't give you a realm or anything. So if you want this to be an other place, it can. And I think Mage becomes a richer game if we don't just force every world culture to jam what it does into one of the three Umbrae. Additionally to that, as you mentioned, they are not non-judgmental towards each other's activity. They kind of have full autonomy. They are also somewhat territorial compared to some of the other groups, in that someone is like, hey, this is my area. I know the spirits in the area. I'm gonna do my stuff here. What is the natural story you feel the Bala Moab lend themselves towards?
Obviously, if somebody's getting in touch with their indigenous historical, ethnic roots, is a really good thing here. And there's a couple others in this group that I love for that. But I also like the idea of, hey, we're doing something in Mesoamerica. We're doing something in that region where these folks are set up, and you show up and you're like, hey, this is a friend I met and we're good buddies and he'll take care of us. And then something happens and now you have to run off to some other territory and you meet some other shaman who is not your friend and does not like you, and suck it up, Buttercup, you're in his house now. And so there's some fun stuff to have with that, as opposed to some of these other organizations where you've met one of them, you can kind of expect how others will be like, and they may not.
And it also strikes me as a thing that this person that your characters may be interfacing with is to say that they are vastly more familiar with the spirit landscape of their area than even a powerful spirit practitioner not from there is kind of an understatement. So I like the story where, yeah, okay, you have spirit 4, but you don't have the knowledge and the contacts to do anything useful with it in this particular region where there is a tainted node that you're trying to deal with, or a spirit that is slowly loosing its shackles or needs to be rebound, or there is some dark reflection in the penumbra that needs to be dealt with. And characters like the Bala Moab that have a strong cultural tie and a very strong sense of place and presence. I think that's an interesting way to be like, nope, you got to deal with a sorcerer now. Have fun with that. The next one that you did was the Cult of Isis. What are they?
The Cult of Isis is a lot of things. The vibe I went with this was, yes, there totally used to be an ancient cult of Isis. Proper religion, had your worship of Isis. You had, fertility cults dedicated to her. And then, of course, as time passes on, things kind of separate and go away, but there's always something left behind. In some case, some of these fertility cults have kept going quietly and secretly. Some have been kind of reinvented by people discovering this stuff for themselves as a personal thing. And then basically, I liked this whole, I'm going to say sisterhood, but it's not necessarily a gendered practice. Mm-hmm. But the fact that there's like, oh yeah, we do this some stuff and we kind of have this motherhood, fertility vibe kind of thing. And well, you do too? Okay, cool. We're both cults of Isis. There has to be some obvious overlap in the fact that they are generally speaking carers, and they do have that kind of maternal vibe, but there's also the fertility side. And yes, there absolutely can be like ritualistic sex magic. Sure, absolutely. But then you go over to this other cult and they're like, we kind of pray and lay hands on people and heal them. And you go, oh, okay, yeah, no, that works too. And as long as it is within these kind of, broad spectrum of stuff, I mean, I really feel that they need to be drawing on Egyptian hieroglyphs and some of the geomantic kind of stuff that belongs to Egyptian sorcery, for lack of a better term. But as long as you're closely related, yeah, they bring you in. Sure, absolutely. And there's one little section that I really, because, yeah, I wrote it, but I'm still happy with it. Like, amidst a social media organization of amateur medics, the cult work their magic, tending to wounds that happen during riots or self-defense or anything like that, where they're like, oh, no, we'll take care of them. Don't worry. It's not nearly as bad as it looks. And shove away all the sleepers. And you don't need to be involved. We'll bring them back in just a second. We just got to put a bandage on his head. He's totally fine. And then they, frantically work some magic to actually save somebody off the brink of death because, well, they're still the cult of Isis. They're still a cult. And I feel like they still should be secretive-ish.
And it's kind of interesting because some groups talk about having an unbroken chain of knowledge going back millennia. This doesn't quite do this. It is a unbroken chain of ideals. It's not like their version of the path of healing has gone unchanged for 3 millennia or anything like that. The ideals have. So this is a fascinating case where the methods and practices have probably changed, but the goal has not, which to me contrasts interestingly with another group you did, the Dozen Priests of the Pythian Order, which we'll talk about next. But what is the story that you think the Cult of Isis does a very good job of telling?
The thing I kind of leaned on with them is that we had ancient Egyptian archaeologists, by which I mean we had in ancient Egypt archaeologists studying their own ancient origins. And that is something that I kind of like for the Cult of Isis. If you are, let's say, playing them, you're trying to develop your cult, you're trying to develop your knowledge and understanding and looking around and being like, there was that group 20 years back and they've disbanded. Well, how are they doing stuff? And then looking even farther back and doing, okay, well, actually, yeah, back in 2,000 years ago, how were they doing stuff? And having this kind of range of different methodologies and different attitudes and kind of navel-gazy kind of approach to stuff and looking at yourself. And if you were to interact with them, I see them as the secretive social manipulators. Yes, they're absolutely here to help stuff, but a lot of them are going to be pushing a social narrative. They worship ISIS. There's going to be a women's liberation kind of thing, especially considering their origin in Arab nations. There's going to be some like, hey, let's throw off some patriarchy kind of vibes. There's going to be some, we're supporting certain political opponents, and hey, we don't have any problem with sex. We are a fertility cult, but that particular politician over there who's married, well, we might just apply some manipulation there. And so there's some stuff that I feel like you can play with because their specific morals are going to be different than Joe Schmo public, where they are manipulating and using their own power.
So who are the dozen priests of the Pythian order, and what's their deal?
They're the most stubborn bastards of all, and they're dying out. They're down to 4, and they live on a temple in Milos, and they believe that magic is in poems, and they are seriously unimpressed with everybody who has shown up to try and learn from them because they're just not as good as the Pythian order is. And yeah, it's just not worth it. They're willing to let their knowledge and magic die because it would be an affront to the gods with some of these people who are showing up trying to learn. They're, looking into the future. They're desperate to find some good students, but nobody's matching up to their requirements. And so they may be doomed.
And is it strictly just kind of an allegory for the necessity of change or perish?
That is kind of the lean I went into, in the fact that they had dozens of priests, or at least 12 way back, and they kind of passed on, they had students. And now for whatever reason, and I don't have a specific reason why they're not happy with students, but I don't accept this. And yeah, if you want to lean into that whole, hey, students shouldn't have chalkboards or erasers because they will continue to make mistakes if they can easily erase them, and some of this old-fashioned thinking that we have in education, these guys very well could be the same, where, hey, listen, this is what art was, this is what poetry was in our time, and you all aren't matching up because your poetry now goes to a different beat or doesn't have a beat, or for whatever reason your stuff just isn't as good as what we had. And so, yeah, maybe they're just so deep in their nostalgia, their magic's going to die off. This is the, hey, go raid these dummies and take their knowledge, take their power, because they're not giving it up. But, you do you.
It's also the case, though, that if there are 4 of them, and with the path of divination and healing, these could be characters that are possibly centuries old.
Correct.
It's one of those things that there's very few, and you're right, they don't make them like they used to for whatever reason, and it could be your secret group that is unduly potent. And maybe they're sufficiently powerful that they only feel that they find their equal among the awakened, which could also be awkward. I think they are also a good example of, in some cases, it is one of those things where some people will mock us and say, oh, you need indoor plumbing, or you can't sleep unless you have a very soft pillow in a particular way. There are ways in which we are used to modernity, and it may be useful that a character has to learn something from someone who will not let them use an eraser. And it doesn't become the cornerstone of a plot, but it's a pretty fascinating cutscene, because one of the things in Mage is, if you have very strong beliefs, it can take you to real weird places. Sister Bernadette spoke entirely in music, which makes total sense considering what her paradigm was. And it's good to see that kind of on the sorceress side as well. And if you just want them to be a warning, or maybe they give into infernalism to continue their line, or what does it mean when the last 4 disappear and say there are no students remaining? That's a group that can kind of your apocalypse prophecy, and if they disappear, no one may notice. So you can't do it wrong. That's kind of one of the advantages of these little guys. So who is my son Labon?
Yes. They made me mad because they're an offshoot because of the Tremere stuff. And as an awakening guy, I was like, that's not the Tremere. But I mean, okay, you guys were here for it, so fine. But yeah, it was, a hermetic group that split off during the Hermetic Schism, and it's also where the Tremere vampires showed up. They basically bailed, but then fled to northern France, and this is the 11th century. So they went and hung out with the Visigoths, and basically, yeah, they took on the Labon name, meaning to live, leave, survive. And just the super sneaky, skulky order of sorcerers who you do not tell your own wife, you do not tell your own spouse that what you do or what magic is. They are pretty sure that they might be still actively hunted by anybody who might still be holding a grudge, especially when you talk about vampires. Some of those folks are still around and kicking and hunting. The big push was for them to basically be secretive, normal, ordinary folks. And these ones where, other ones are secret orders. These people, their lives are secretive and kind of double agent kind of stuff where it's like, yes, I am absolutely an accountant and I have nothing interesting about my life. Then the sun sets, I go into the basement and I have hermetic ritual circles under the boat that I'm building under a tarp so my wife doesn't see kind of folks.
And it's kind of interesting because looking over their favored paths, they're one of 4 groups that has quintessence manipulation. So you have them, the Star Council, the Thalhun, and the Uzoma. And that is a spread. One of the ideas that I kind of like is that mages dealing with the Sorcerer Society have a benefit of maintaining plausible deniability. The idea that you can have someone that doesn't really give off prime in the course of doing their magic, but is still capable of manipulating quintessence, I think is pretty fascinating. It gives us an interesting angle to be like, oh, okay, so how do we subtly manipulate a ley line? It turns out we have these mortals that can do it, but the tricky thing is they're one of the more hidden groups. And the Path of Shadow and the Path of Fortune, you can stay hidden for quite a while. So besides the kind of double agent thing, it seems like, again, each of these groups is in some way a commentary on Mage, and the idea of do you have a new life, do you have an old life is one that continues. Where do you see this house fitting into a game of Mage?
I really do like them as concerts if you actually manage to catch one or they find you, which is more likely, and they realize, you're a mage. Hey, could you do me this favor? And you're staring at this guy going, who are you? How do you know I can do what I do? And why would I do this favor for you? And all they say is, I'll make it worth your while. It's like, okay, who are you? And bust out your mage Rolodex and go, who is this guy? He's not on anybody's list. Nobody knows who this guy is. He's an accountant from the 4th floor. Who is he? All right, fine. I'll bite. Let me do this little favor. And he goes, cool. I owe you one. And you still don't know who this guy is, but you realize, okay, this is a favor that's worth having just because this guy is so unusual. I love the idea of the John Wick or Jason Bourne kind of vibes for these people, because I imagine, yes, they do have their quintessence manipulation. They mess with shadow, they mess with fortune, but I feel like a lot of these folks are set up and they have go back. It is in their DNA to be like, nope, I'm ready to walk away from this life, probably grab the kids under each arm and just run off with them, or possibly even from heat. Oh, those are the cops. Bye. And just leave it all behind. That for me, I think would be the fun. If you don't get these guys on your team just because they find you, is the fact that, oh, aha, I found this guy. Where'd he go?
Yeah. So the next group that you did was the Order of the Golden Fly, the Nebu Afef. What are they and why shouldn't we play one?
Absolutely. I have made a Reddit post and I made a whole sidebar about why you could play one, but we'll get to that. Yeah, these guys are assholes. 100%. I had a blast writing these people after I got permission to make it very clear that they're a bunch of assholes.
So what do they do?
These are the scions of a bunch of Egyptian soldiers who had their firstborns killed by the angel of death. And so they said, okay, well, we're going to get our revenge. So they spent a bunch of time in order to earn skill and power. And then they summoned forth an angel. And turns out the very angel that destroyed all the firstborn in Egypt. And they bound him to their will, except that they didn't. And they had been manipulated this entire time by this angel who has fallen, Mastema. And he's just like, man, I actually kind of like that killing thing. So I'm going to do some more of it. And I'm just going to nudge these people into being their absolute worst selves while they think that they're doing everything of their own volition. There's no mind control stuff. It's just like, oh, yes, you want me to ruin that enemy of yours. Cool. I'm going to do that. And all this collateral damage. Or it's this ritual. it's going to cost you something in order to actually pull this off. I will advise you in how to do this, master, as he ruins your life, cuts you off from other people who are not part of the Nebu FF at this point now, especially because of their origin in being anti-Semitic, the originals, now post World War II, and they're totally pro-Nazi, and now they're your local alt-right group, neo-Nazis who yelling, screaming, and are full of hate. And a member of this is going to be absolutely deep in it and can't think of any other life for themselves.
They are almost cultic in that regard, that it is a totalizing identity. And that's kind of an interesting thing that you mentioned. Mind control isn't being used by this angel, quote unquote, this entity that they've summoned, but just by providing its member selective power, you can kind of influence what they do. If you give people the ability to do destruction, they will use destruction as kind of their default path to accomplish something. And it does a good job of explaining how one person with kind of a bunch of power and the willingness to play the long game can kind of wreak destruction. To me, this gives a template. If you don't like the Nephandi as an idea in the game of having, if you just don't kind of like that cosmic entity, just the idea that there are mortal groups or mage groups that have reached out to cosmic powers, didn't know what they were dealing with, and it just took advantage of human nature without anyone stepping through the calls, is kind of fascinating. So do you explain what Mastema is, or is that a question for the storyteller?
In this, and I pulled from the previous histories, he is a fallen angel. He is the angel that wreaked all this havoc and now has fallen from God's grace and now is a total rampaging, violent asshole. As you mentioned, yeah, he's going to give you power, but Mastema only does destructive things, manipulative things. So suddenly you have a hammer and everything is a nail, especially because there was a period. Oh yes, they were going to go meet up with Hitler, and then suddenly all their leadership just died. Somebody had a hand in it. Nobody's fessing up, but then again, I don't think anybody really cares at this point. And so all the order's highest priests were gone, and so you had a bunch of students, and it's a gang. Hey, welcome to the gang. We are now going to beat you up and humiliate you, and that, we're going to haze you in. And this is how you summon this angel who may show up, because, I mean, these rituals are very precise and difficult. And if you do it wrong, he may not show up. And no, as I mentioned in the sidebar, if somebody wants to play them, absolutely. The storyteller is going to roll all your dice for you, all your summon, binding, and warding path rolls, going to roll them for you in secret. And even if that roll is successful, Mastema has been contacted. The phone is ringing. Mastema doesn't necessarily need to even pick up. In that same sidebar, and this is the thing that came up in a Reddit, there's a Reddit post that actually called this out. They wrote a big, huge sorcerer review. This is the only part that they mentioned in the affiliate section. They're like, we're not dumb. Why would you put this sidebar in here? And the answer is, A, I was unwilling to write this section without a sidebar. Travis was totally on board with it. Travis is the developer. But specifically because I wanted to be clear, these guys are bad, and they should only be antagonists, which most people are going to read this and go, yes, these are antagonists. But I also wanted to do a little shout out that, hey, this is also the redemption story. This is, you are playing somebody who is in deep, can't see any way out. Somebody, hopefully one of the other players, goes, dude, do you see how deep you are? And yeah, I do see how deep, and pull somebody out. Yes, this is 100% a let's break the fourth wall and look out there. And maybe there's somebody who reads this and goes, oh, hey, I am surrounded by shitty people, and I feel like I myself am a shitty person, and I can't get out of this. And the answer is yes, you totally can. Just find somebody outside of that group and say, I need help.
One of the books in Revised under Jesse Heinig's tutelage had a comment that said, most gamers aren't idiots, but some are, and a lot of people will read this book. So if we take the probability, which is low, times the number of players, which is going to be high, there's still a bunch of idiots, and this warning is for them. So congratulations, if this is not required of you, you have passed the test. The next group that you did was the Seven Thunders. Who are they?
The Seven Thunders are the right hand of God, come to prepare the world for the apocalypse at the turn of the new millennium, but it is now 2020. 2022 at the time of this recording. And the apocalypse says in here, guys, did we get the prophecy wrong? Did we read the omens? Happened. And all of a sudden have gone from apocalypse time with our amazing magical God-given powers. There may or may not be air quotes depending on your particular interpretation. But hey, Armageddon isn't here. So gear shift. What are we going to do now? And they've shifted to let's prepare the earth for it. And they've basically kind of split up. And so where they once were this kind of organized group of true faith prophets that were working everywhere, now, well, they're kind of split up and they're spread out literally physically to cover more territory. They don't all necessarily agree in how things are to be done. They're still trying to do the right thing. So for some of them, they are coming out and teaching people, and you have true faith miracles and healing people and turning away vampires and werewolves and forbidden mystics and all sorts of other stuff. And some of them probably have militia, well-meaning grandmas with shotguns. And then there may be some others who have kind of gone a far more militant route and decided that, nope, we need to take over governments and prepare the way for the apocalypse or whatever. I didn't actually really set things up. Your own interpretation. You've got 7 of these folks and split them up and have them argue and doing things. This is very much a group that I guess you could join and team up with them, but I don't see a player being one of the 7 Thunder. There may be a member of a congregation that is following along and serving and helping their prophets, or you may just be standing there on the side watching this parade of people march through your town saying Armageddon is coming, and you going, what the hell?
It gives us a fascinating look at a few things. For instance, Mage doesn't really have any fallen traditions in it. We don't have any groups that were just proved to be wrong. And the idea of what if we threw an apocalypse and nobody came, I think is kind of a fascinating idea. And it lets us kind of make a tongue-in-cheek look back at the revised meta plot now that we have the lens of the 20th anniversary editions. Obviously, Judgment did not come unless you set your game in the 90s or something like that, and that's a perfectly acceptable setting for M20. We have a group, our reason to be here isn't extant anymore. How do we cope? I think is a great microcosm of the fact that I think all good stories involving the traditions talk about some sort of fundamental tension that they all face in the 21st century, and no one is sure how it will resolve. And through the course of the groups that you've done, you've talked about groups that have done a wonderful job of pivoting with modernity, the Cult of Isis, other groups that have not, the Pythians, and a group that's in the middle, the Seven Thunders. And just seeing that philosophical spread, again, it feels great to have the sorcerers recapitulate the main themes of Mage of what is meaning and what is belief. The next one that you did, the Society of Enlightened Altruistic Ideologues, and this is easily the newest of the sorcerer societies, and we touched on them briefly in Technocracy Reloaded. So what are they, and what do you want to do with them?
I had a blast with these folks because my day job is super corporate, paper pushing kind of stuff. So this was 100% my, yes, listen, if we ran the company, this is how we would do it. And we know better. We're on the front lines. We know better. We know what we could do. And this is a bunch of members of the Technocracy support crew. Between pushing papers, fetching coffee, and reporting statistics, the SEAI have overheard things, tracked events, calculated expenditures, and taken careful notes with a single idea in mind: capture a tradition mage, mind wipe them, and take their avatar for themselves. Because none of that sounds like a terrible idea at all.
Yep. So if you need more than that, I'm sorry, I can't help you.
Yeah.
This does a couple things. One, this is the only group that is directly tied to a faction in the Ascension War. They're literally part of the Technocracy. We have this amazing, like, lower deck style game of, like, so what's everyone else doing in the course of the Ascension conflict? And also this kind of interesting question on what is equal rights and what is fairness. In some way, Mage is the game of greatest elitism. You can become a vampire by being bitten. There's no force on Earth that can kind of give you an avatar. Maybe? yet. So the only thing more terrifying than these people advancing their agenda and failing would be if they succeeded. What other thoughts kind of went into it? And what was it like writing for a group that was already tied into an existing group?
I had a lot of fun with this because the Technocracy, weirdly enough, is really the only Mage 20, M20, or any Mage the Ascension group that I know, because I got to play them a while back. And so I dug into a bunch of stuff for Technocracy Reloaded. And 100%, I just got this image of people standing around in polo shirts and dress shirts and little ties in a break room, drinking coffee, eating donuts, and talking and planning. And I know what we can do. Yeah, this is what we can do. And people sliding little notes to each other and sending some coded, air quote, emails to one another. And then, getting dramatically silent when an enlightened operative walks into the room. Not that they ever walk into their break room. No, they have a better break room. But
their astral break room.
Right, exactly.
The other fun thing about this is this brings up the first time Drew and I met. I don't know if Drew realized it, but it was I think it was PAX Unplugged, and Travis was running the OPP booth, and you walked by, and Travis and I, it's like, so Mage the podcast with one of the Mage developers, and we're talking about Mage. He's like, oh yeah, 1 second. Hey Drew, we're doing a Mage actual play. You wanted to do it? You're like, sure, sounds like fun. You're being a technocrat. You're like, I don't know what that is. And I'm like, Mate's the podcast guy, right? Literally, you pointed over. Okay, that's fine. I mean, I'd never done an actual play, which was the important part.
Right.
But that was my first meeting of Drew.
Yes.
The penultimate group you did was one that I have. Soft spot is an understatement. The sheer amount of lore that can be jammed into a single page is proven by this group, the Thalhun. What the dink are they?
Oh my God. They were the ones, like, the Arcanum was bad. The Thalhun, Travis took an axe too, because I tried to shove as much story and history about these alien worshipping scientists. We crammed this down as close as we could, but yeah, they perform science, and it just happens to look like magic, just because magic is accidentally stumbling upon this science, the Thal, that the Thalhun perform. It's absolutely not Scientology. Please don't come after me, Tom Cruise. They have an ancient race that just developed this technology, tried to introduce it to humanity back in the Babylonian era, and all of a sudden these people went wild with their magic, and their leader Kuvan basically said, no, that's not going to work, and so leveled all that and got rid of them, and then went to sleep in the earth, in the core of the earth, and then popped out very recently and started to teach scientists instead of priests. And this has worked out much better. They're on the edge of pseudoscience. I believe canonically they were part of the Star Council, and then with this book we actually split them away from the Star Council. They are very much a pseudoscience group. They use implements and iconography that may look like magic, crystal rods and staves and all these other kind of stuff, and they use harmonics and special wording and mental attunement. It's absolutely not magic. It's not magic. Stop saying that. It's totally science, guys.
Let's recognize, though, that, talk about Mage predicting things. It says they talk about setting a resonance. They have mastered the path of vibes. In Year of Our Lord 2022, we have a sorcerer's path of vibes, and they're just all vibes.
Yep.
And I appreciate that as the Society of Ether and the Cult of Ecstasy, neither of them being able to make heads or tails out of this group. And you make mention that in Revised, they had merged with the Star Council and then spectacularly unmerged because they did an oopsie there. And just the front side, back side of being able to compare the two is fascinating. And I'm going to misquote you and say they are on the bleeding edge of pseudoscience. And I just kind of like that as a concept. I love the Huija. The fact that they have a colon as a diacritic within their name is amazing. The sheer amount of fun that people can have with things that aren't part of the main canon is just energizing when you read any of the old sorcerer things where you're like, no one cares. Here's a page of an entire civilization that exploded and that may or may not have happened. I like the idea that you make mention of 300 of the Huija that were selected to be Java. Maybe another one of them is out there and you run into one. And again, the Thalhun can be an amazing reflection, an amazing commentary. You have your hyper-technical person or your techno-mystical person, and then you see what the mortals are doing. And you call it pseudoscience, but it works. Like, there's the path. You got the dice pool.
Yep.
It may not succeed all the time, but that's better than what most people can say. We don't have the pseudo there, but we certainly have the science portion. What was your favorite aspect of them? You seem very fond of the no, this is totally science, and the idea of the mysticism buried in science is a recurring theme that I wish Mage would spend more time in. I think there are highly mystical technocrats that would declare you unmutual if you called them that, but you're like, let's call a spade here.
Oh yeah, 100%. These are the guys who like science is a religion and religion is a science. Like they worship this. They have this person that they learn from. Their initiation is a week in a sensory deprivation tank. And then they meet the Kuvan in a spirit form. And that's okay, so let's say maybe that's actually happening and they're not hallucinating. Okay, cool. Or they're hallucinating. Either way, they just went through a really traumatic experience and they come out with this new just vibe. They're learning all this stuff. That's terrific. But at the same time, you can laugh at them all you want, but they clearly are working magic. And for me, on the hey, my mage is going to meet these people who are over here and they're sitting at the same table as the UFO spotter folks. And these guys are just a little bit off their rocker, but no, they can definitely do magic. These are one of the other groups that can mess with quintessence. They can call down hellfire. These guys can do some stuff. And then you realize that their plan is to eventually bring in a planet of an advanced civilization. I don't know if you've seen many sci-fi movies, folks. That's usually not a good plan. Do not invite the technologically advanced alien race into the solar system. I'm going to play a mage and I'm going to meet these people, and you laugh, and then they actually do magic and you go, oh, okay, that's okay. What is your end goal? Oh, that's laughable. But because you're actually doing magic, I'm scared that you might actually do it.
Yeah, and these guys may drain your node in the process of powering their magic crystals. And like that's the equivalent of like discovering that your chantry has bed bugs. You're like, damn it, the Thalhun are back. We can't use our node to recharge our crap. How do we... just the sheer level of complication that they can represent is pleasing to me. And the fact that you may have to engage with their batshit to get them to go away, that is a scene that I think every game can be improved by. The last group that you did was the Uzoma. Mm-hmm. Who are they and what do they do?
They are my other shamans. These are the African shamans from the Yoruba region of Africa. And as opposed to the kind of post-imperial for like the Bala Moab, where they're very, this is our territory, the Uzoma are far more widespread. They moved with the African diaspora. And so they're kind of all over the place. This is kind of canonically and real world. These are some of the origin face for like voodoo, which became a, syncretic thing alongside Christianity. This is kind of that origin religion and faith. They are priest sorcerers and they take care of their people, but they're totally cool in the shadows, so to speak. They totally hang out in the background and they take care of their people and they go where their people are. Those who do begin to learn will eventually go back, and they usually go back to, Nigeria, Benin, Togo to begin an apprenticeship and then return back to their homes in likely America or Europe and continue to teach there and find and foster on the next generation who they also send back to Africa. And yeah, they do mounting rituals. So they do possession. They have their own evil sorcerers, the Nanga, who are the spookier folks who deal with the other Orisha, the other gods, who are of more darker origin. And so you have white hats and black hats, effectively, where you've got the good guys who are the Uzoma and who take care of their family of other people, which could be literal family or biological family or found family or the people who live in the same apartment building. And then you have the Nanga who are like, nah, I'm gonna get paid. I'm gonna get my stuff. I'm gonna take care of me. And so, yeah, the Uzoma have a big thing for service, both to the people around them, but also to their gods. Lots of dance, lots of drum ritual, stuff like that. One of the things I have always really liked is that when they are mounted, basically, sometimes the Orisha, the gods, are just like, "Yep, I'm gonna join with my Babalawoa, and they may just join up and just be like, yep, I'm going to hang out in meat space, for lack of a better term, and enjoy this ritual that you have performed. And no, I don't have any particular wise words of wisdom to share with you all right now, but thank you for inviting me." And then just chill. And I'm like, I kind of love that. It's like, we're going to put on this party. We're going to put on this ritual. And yes, it worked. The gods are silent. Is that a good thing? We're just going to assume that it's a good thing because they're not telling us about bad things coming. So we're just going to go with that, guys.
The no news is good news theory of possession.
Yes. These are the ones I felt for a lot because of, I have no personal experience with this, obviously, because I'm a white guy. But like this whole, the African diaspora and the fact that there's this continuing tradition of, old faith that just keeps on trucking, as opposed to the cult of Isis, which is built up and come down, built up, come down, and kind of built on top of each other. And there's this long line that is just unbroken by sheer perseverance to continue this. And then the whole let's go back to Africa and go back, touch grass there, find that cornerstone and go cool. And then going back and taking it back to where you live. I had a lot of fun kind of imagining that. I felt like that is the big kind of a new world meets old.
One of the things I think you kind of have a unique perspective on is, as you mentioned, this is not your native mage, and you jumped in and you wrote for it, and it seemingly has turned out okay. Kind of, what is your recommendation for other people who look at mage and say, there's so much, how do I run a game here? Or there's so much, how do I do a Storyteller Vault supplement without having encyclopedic knowledge of everything? What is your recommendation for other people who haven't been steeped in it for 30 years?
A big one is, at least from personal experience, hey, I had Travis Legge, who was the developer, who basically could look over all my stuff and go, hey, we're just going to throw that out because it's in other books and we don't need it. Or just work on what you know. The SEAI are the ones that I knew because I had read so much about the technocracy. I had a better idea of that. So I could write that very, very well. The others, I had to dig into books, but write that stuff. Do the research, read the thing, and what stuff has come before. You don't have all the books? Okay, write from what you have. And if somebody shows up and wants to talk shit, tell them that I said you could write it. Write it, especially for the Storyteller Vault supplement stuff. Just write it. The worst somebody can do is come in and say, I didn't like that. And you go, cool, write yours. That is 100% my defense. If anybody comes in here and yells about my affiliations and be like, I don't like what you did to the Thalhun, I'm sorry, write your own version.
I want to meet that person. Please, if you are that listener and you want to talk to Drew, please join the magetheascension Discord so we can watch this conversation unfold.
Ping me.
Yeah, ping me. We will have you on in an episode. Drew, thank you so much for talking for us. What projects are you doing these days, or is there anywhere you would like to point our listeners to find out more about what you're doing?
The big one is continuing to be Occultists Anonymous. We have branched out from Mage the Awakening. That is still our primary show, but yeah, we've done some Star Trek now. So for those of you who are into Thalhun, hey, we got you. Got a Geist game coming up next month, just in time for proper spooky season, which is the Wraith analog, sort of. Definitely got some way different vibes. And then that's twitch.tv/Occultists Anonymous, or if you want to come by our Discord, because we have ours, and you're welcome to come and argue with us. I absolutely, and I'll be honest, Terry, shout out to you for your Discord and all your folks who come over and join, and they hang out because they're super pleasant, and I like all of them so far. But yeah, come by.
That person who has shit with you for the Thalhun. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Come by Discord. And for us, that's www.yeetinto.space, the best URL on the internet, and come by our Discord and hang out. We will happily engage in conversation, and we will talk about all the mages, because we do have folks who have come from the Mage the Podcast Discord and like Ascension, and we will happily get into some well-mannered, constructive discussion, not all cap raging, about what we like and what we don't like. And everybody holds hands and prays as we look at M5 on the horizon and wondering what will happen. And I've said it. If Mage the Ascension uses awakening spellcasting rules, you might convert me. Until then. Yeah, basically, yeah. We got a YouTube, Twitch thing going on, or all your favorite podcast places.
Yep, and those will be in the show notes. Hi, Mage fans. This is your host, Terry Robinson with Mage the Podcast, and joining me to discuss yet more M20 Sorcerer is Bek Andrew Evans. Bek wrote a number of the affiliations for Sorcerer, and we're very excited to talk with him today. Bek, how you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm splendid. Bek, how did you come to write on RPGs and maybe M20 Sorcerer?
So I actually started writing for RPGs because I was friends with Matthew Webb, and I wrote for his LARP, The Night in Question. I've kept writing for it. And then Onyx Path put in an all writers call, and I submitted to that. One day, when I was recovering from surgery, I got an email out of the blue that says, "Do you want to write for Mage?" And I said, "Boy, do I." And so that's how I did that.
Most of the people I know who got to write for Mage for the first time had at least that moment of disbelief where they're like, in my case was, hot dang, they're desperate. So I'm glad that yours too was met with a certain degree of elation. Overall, what do you like about M20 Sorcerer?
I like that there's an element of you're mostly mortals. It's lower power than Mage. You can still do a lot with it. It's probably a lot easier to run for newer storytellers because you don't have to get into a lot of the...
It seems to involve less interpretation and adjudication. Like, it feels a bit closer to calling balls and strikes.
Yeah, with the way the linear magic works, how the power works is pretty much how the power works. There's how you can flavor it per your individual sorcerer. It's not like with Mage where you have to really adjudicate, would life to really do this?
You wrote a number of the affiliations, and the affiliations are kind of the cornerstone of what the setting for Sorcerer is. These are the groups that characters can join or that they may interface with. These are great opportunities for a storyteller, even of a non-sorcerer game, to have characters with interesting motives that they dropped in. The first one I think you wrote for was the Children of Osiris. Who are they?
Okay, so the Children of Osiris, they are the mortal sorcerer counterparts to the vampire Children of Osiris. They were originally more of a resurrection cult. Now they're more concerned with extending life more than just doing resurrection. Kind of an Egyptology nerd. From the mortal side, I brought in more of the real-life mythology of Osiris to how they view their side of things, though Osiris is still a vampire.
Can you give an example of that maybe worldview or magical practice that you brought in that maybe wasn't there before?
It has to do with the Isis being a protector of him and being a very important figure in his resurrection in the mythology. That's how he was supposed to get the 14 pieces of Osiris were brought back together when Set ripped him up. Set ripped him up in a frenzy. So Isis brought him back imperfectly, and then he unfortunately became a vampire in the process of that. That caused a rift in their relationship.
So it sounds like the Children of Osiris are an awesome bridge if you do want a vampire game. We have also Mason Labon that kind of does that. What did the Children of Osiris do in the world?
They're more interested in research, and they're looking into the extension of life, of their own lives. They're not so much trying to do the resurrection thing like other editions wanted them to do. They're not seeking to directly resurrect Osiris. Osiris is taking care of the underworld where he's supposed to be. He's king of the underworld. He's on his throne. They are living clean and healthy lives and trying to avoid the followers of Set, and also taking advantage of the growing interest in ancient Egyptian mythology as it grows in pop culture.
Okay, the next group that you wrote for was the Cult of Mercury. What do they do and where do they come from?
So they're an ancient Roman cult that does exclusively massive ritual magic. Now, it should really be noted the way religions in that time and region worked, it was fairly par for the course that they just surrounded one of their local gods and worshipped one of them in particular, held extra reverence for to fulfill their needs. So it's not a cult as we would think of in like the modern sense. Their current incarnation is a cult in the modern sense. But originally they were not, it didn't mean the same thing.
How is their notion of cult maybe different from what we would think of a modern cult?
They are simply an ancient religion that has lasted all this time. They have also adapted with the regions they've spread into. When the cult of Mercury spread to new areas, built new temples, and sort of adopted new gods, they looked at those gods as those regions' interpretations of Mercury. They're just a different perspective of Mercury, but it's still Mercury. This is reflected in the actual mechanics of the affiliation, where storyteller discretion, a temple that's not from Rome, can switch out one of their paths for a different one more suitable for their vision of Mercury.
Okay, so you go to a new area and you see some god, Balanel or something, so the angel of transit, and you're like, that's like our dude, but he also lights stuff on fire. So we learn hellfire.
Yes, that could be something like that.
The other thing that kind of struck me reading through it is they don't do rituals with fewer than 50 people.
That's actually a downgrade from previous editions. Previous editions had them do 100 people.
So on the plus side, using the assistance rules, that's you get to have a meaty fistful of dice should you be the one casting it. How do I use these folks in a game?
You're going to have a lot of hierarchy and potential for internal politicking within the cult because you're going to have just so many members necessary for all the rituals. So maybe your players want to become the leadership or be the hand behind the throne. But also, they could be just this massive problem for another affiliation that is using this massive dice pool for rituals against the player's affiliation.
Yeah, it's at a scale that it could easily stymie your regular chantry, especially if they're doing something involving, say, quintessence manipulation, messing around with the Shadowlands, or something else that can cause a lot of problems for a lot of people at a certain scale.
They have an issue. They have to prepare everything in advance. They can have their hanging spells, but they can't, a lone sorcerer on their own, decide they want to do a thing. And they also can't do normal path magic. They can only do rituals.
So they don't have access to spells as we would know it, but it also lists that for each dot that they get in a path, they do get 2 rituals for it. So that seems that seems pretty potent. So it seems like this is a great thing where the magic is almost secondary in terms of effect-wise to the politicking to try and get a group to maybe do what you want. That this is kind of a fascinating political maneuvering game that maybe some of the other affiliations presented aren't quite simply large enough to present. It also specifically talks about how devotees tend to be in positions of power, so this could provide a pretty awesome network for a character.
Originally, some of the devotees were in politics. They were senators or even just merchants with high aspirations who wanted to go places.
So the next group that you wrote for were the Fenian. What are they and what do they do?
They're more a bloodline than an actual study to learn all of your things type sorcerer. They're a Celtic bloodline that have Fey blood in their ancestry. So they were originally just an oddity with a connection to werewolves and samurai and changelings, but they were dying out because of the aforementioned connection to the samurai. They're losing their magic because they were losing the closeness to the Fae, and also because people kept breaking their promises.
Yeah, every member seems to be bound by a geesh of some sort.
The fun thing about the contract with the Fae is that learn your different paths, you can potentially end up with conflicting rules if your storyteller and your player agree that that is a thing that you're okay with happening. When they break the contract, they have extra difficulty using any magic whatsoever, and they even have experience penalties when they try to buy more. Normally, they have an experience break on those because they're part of their blood. They're naturally predisposed to being able to do this type of magic. They're notably the only bloodline that's more likely to become a changeling rather than awaken as a mage.
So this group has a pretty good in if you want to have that changing influence. The Tuatha De Danann may be or may not be the same as changelings because it's the world of darkness and a bunch of things can be called by the same name. And the familial aspect of it kind of gives an interesting angle because within Mage we have groups that claim to be familial, but rarely does the game actually back them up. We have like the Merovingians and one Verbene family that seems to do that, and for all we know that's merely coincidence. But here this seems to very much be that. It also gives us that wonderful opportunity of what does it take to figure out what geesh you're actually bound by, and can they be renegotiated? I always like the idea that it's like 7 generations must tend to a flock of dodo or something like that, and they're like, well, that's not happening. So either we get to play a fun game of going to Pangea to resurrect a dodo in the Middle Umbra, or we need to talk to the mists or whatever to try and renegotiate that.
Those sorts of multi-generational contracts are part of the reason why they weren't having access to their magic, but some of them are starting to again.
So the next group that you did, I have no idea how to pronounce. I'm going to say the Fornjafnir. What are they? What do they do?
So they are basically Nordic pagan Antifa. They're a completely new group affiliation for this edition, and they are replacing Asatru Uthark. They're an example of a Nordic sorcerer group that isn't just full-on neo-Nazis. They are the opposite of that. They're decentralized, and they have different covens that may take different approaches to how they handle their local problems. Above all, they do not take kindly to this especially recent phenomena of traditional religion being appropriated by neo-Nazis. And they get to punch Nazis with hellfire.
So besides Nazi punching and stories of kind of reclaiming belief, do they have other activity within the Ascension conflict or kind of a neat niche that they fill, or are they just kind of your bruisers, as it were?
They are mostly bruisers. They could also team up with other groups. Like they might sometimes hang out with the Verbena. They are mostly focused on their own goals. But they do have the option. They might make different allies depending on individual coven because they are decentralized. But there's not so much an affiliation-wide allyship.
So they're individualized in what they work for. They don't have a huge degree of centralized leadership. They fight against people that they feel have misappropriated their beliefs. I kind of like this as a template. So we are used to the Norse fighting Nazis. What happens if other groups suddenly decide to take back their heritage, like any of the groups that their Hermetics have just kind of stolen from? I'd be kind of curious to see what that equivalent would look like. And speaking of groups that the Hermetics may have stolen from, the next group you worked on was the Mogan Halev, which, from what I understand, is a name change from previous edition. What are they? Where did they come from? And what do they do?
The Shield of the 36, the Orthodox Jewish affiliation that believes that there's 36 essentially righteous people that exist in every generation and they must be protected. Otherwise, the world will be doomed to the apocalypse. So originally they were men-only affiliation. That has slightly changed, like with an asterisk. The main coven is still men-only. They are still segregated by gender, but they do have the option of sister covens comprised of women and the women perform complementary duties. The women do the practical protection magic, while the men focus on divination and spirit-related paths to find the 36 potentially righteous people, while the women are doing the actual protecting.
So in your mind, when they find one of the 36, do they tell them that they are one of the righteous 36?
No. The sort of things that they would do would be like helping and protecting strangers secretly. The reason why they wouldn't tell the 36 is because there's no point in it. Like, if they told them, a real 36 wouldn't admit to it. They would be too humble.
Your characters may be involved in being reached out to find one of them, or one of your characters is one of the 36, or I think it would be great if we had a hilarious case of mistaken identity, where they think they are, but they're not. The next group that you wrote for is, in terms of age, not quite as venerable as Judaism, the Nephite Priesthood. I thought they were fascinating. They apparently saved the world in Revised, which is cool. Who are they and what do they do?
The Nephite Priesthood. They are a Church of Latter-day Saints mystics affiliation with an extremely strict code of conduct. This extends to people they come into contact with. They're missionaries, and they have been destroyed down to one elder. They're also an apocalypse cult. They want to protect the world.
Yeah, they were involved in some great ritual. All but one of them disappeared. Joining them involves making an annual 40-day, 40-night wilderness journey that stretches from Utah to South America and avoiding civilization. They gathered on the 104th anniversary of Utah's statehood. Only person remaining, Porter Larson, doesn't want to talk about what happened. So, yeah, and is currently trying to rebuild it. But one of the other interesting angles on this is one of the few organizations that mortal governments are aware of. What's going on there?
The connection with them is that the actual Church of Latter-day Saints has been on watch lists before. So the Nephite Priesthood ended up on watch lists. There's a long and storied history of massacres in Utah involving the U.S. government and the Church of Latter-day Saints. So there is that suspicion that the government could be involved again, especially Project Twilight, who would have been called this time. The possibility that they could have done something wrong as far as their own ritual went terribly wrong. A way you can bring them into the story is have the players, if they want to be initiate, they could be part of the rebuilding and part of solving the mystery of what happened to the original priesthood.
So we have ourselves a good old-fashioned Mormon detective story.
Yeah. You could also use them more in the background as well. You don't want to play as them and still have their mystery, but have another group exploring it. But you could also be exploring some of their interactions with other groups, because they did not make friends. They had an entire trail of enemies.
They view contact with other people as treasonous. They tend to trespass as they do their wanderings. They haven't really made any friends. Although if you can produce evidence that whatever they did on the 104th anniversary of Utah's statehood maybe saved all of reality, maybe people are going to be a little bit better disposed towards them. Who knows? That's a big old storyteller-shaped hole that you get to fill in your game. So what is the Silver Portal?
So they are the closest things that sorcerers see to marauders. They're a very loose affiliation where the sorcerers in it chaotically pluck knowledge of new paths and rituals out of the dream realm to use in the real world, temporarily losing access to their old paths and rituals.
Yeah, this is a group where you keep track of the total number of dots spent in paths and rituals at all times. Whenever you enter the dream realm, you can redistribute those dots, even if you hadn't had it before. You say marauders. What are they encountering in the dream realms that might cause this rearrangement?
They can encounter Umbrood and other astral spirit creatures and horrifying realities and Part of their initiation is doing as much drugs and sleep deprivation as possible until they reach enlightenment. That's their starting point.
Where do you see them being used in a game?
They're sort of like, if you want to have a mixed affiliation game, I feel like they would probably be best used. Like, it would be all well and good to have an All Silver Portals game, but they don't really congregate together a whole lot. To have that member of your group who decide to pluck Hellfire out of the Dream Realm before a raid, whatever the group might happen to lack, but they're good for making jack-of-all-trades, chaotic type characters within reason. The storyteller is going to need to be a little bit watchful of making sure that it doesn't get too out of control.
Yeah, it seems like it'd be useful to have a character that has a few dots essentially in plot device. And it would be neat to have an interesting thing to be like, hey, a new path has been created and somehow the Silver Portal guy has access to it, even though no one else knows about it. But their central philosophy is that all ideas exist somewhere in the Maya, so maybe they wander into it. Or something similar. They need to lead your group on a quest to find that path that they need to take out Malankar the All-Consuming or something like that. Or in some way they don't have control over it, or they lose access to the dreaming and are kind of to the Mire and are stuck with it. Yeah, it seems to have a lot of interesting options, and they kind of put their money where their mouth is, because like cultists may do the same thing, but they don't come back from a vision quest with different dots. So take that. You also did one of my favorite groups, the Star Council. And in Revise, they had been briefly merged with the Thalhun, and then a bad thing, capital B, capital T, kind of happens. What's the status of the Star Council in M20? What are they and what do they do?
They're recovering from said bad thing. They're a group of people who love terrestrials, conspiracy theory-minded type things along those lines. They're more the lower end of the chaos, the getting into actual serious trouble than the Thalhun.
That the Thalhun were more of a cult, where the Star Council were more of a club.
They're for the love of discovery and for supporting each other and their love of their interests.
And it's also interesting because they seem to have this very strong, we're dorks and we're dorks, but we have each other vibe to them that I think is remarkably wholesome, for lack of a better term. I imagine that on occasion they can turn into absolute shit goblins because it made mention about the Area 51 meme being their doing, at least within the world of darkness. So how do you see the Star Council being used in a game?
It would probably be causing some minor problems for other supernatural creatures, or getting into minor trouble, looking into places they shouldn't, getting a little too close. They're actually mostly psychic, whereas the Thalhun have their ritualistic, strict education. The Star Council broke away partially because they could do their magic without having to do that strict education. A good number of them developed psychic phenomena, though some of them did end up developing especially technomagic.
It seems like they're a great group if you want someone who is kind of annoying but not a huge danger to break into your Society of Ether Chantry 17 times, or to cause constant low-level annoyance to your progenitor base because they seem very driven. I think it is also an interesting story in that they have this very one-for-all, all-for-one kind of thing to it. I could very much see one of your character's allies being like, hey, I did a favor for you, you need to do a favor for me. Jimmy got in over his head, and we're not going to leave him behind, or something to that effect. And the other thing is, as you mentioned, they have psychic phenomenon. They're one of the few societies that really has that crossover angle of doing both linear magic and having access to psychic phenomenon. That, to me at least, is pretty fascinating. They also seemingly have an idea of how memetics work, and I could see them very much being a thorn in the side to the New World Order, or starting stuff with the virtual adepts, which I think is kind of fascinating, or running into the Orpheus group, or any number of other weird science things that occur within the world of darkness.
Even just using some of the psychic phenomenon, the cyberpathy and cyberkinesis, could end up a thorn in their side pretty quickly.
The last group that you wrote for specifically was Project Twilight. What is the role of Project Twilight? Because they, along with probably the Arcanum, are the group where the most number of words have been spilled previously about them. How did you update them to probably 2020 when you wrote it and 2022 when we're going to play it?
Project Twilight is the conglomeration of all the U.S. intelligence agents from all of the different subdivisions, NSA, CIA, for disease control, and any other agency you can think of has some degree of intelligence agencies. There's probably a degree of Project Twilight in there somewhere, watching over things, looking for supernatural involvement, looking for mages getting out of hand, looking for vampires getting their claws too deep. They don't all work at the same office or anything. Project Twilight is a nickname. A note in there, I'm 26. I started playing World of Darkness, the movie Twilight. That movie series was still coming out when I started playing World of Darkness. I did not have the context for the original reference for what Project Twilight was referencing. So when my storyteller, who was a great number of years older than me, was trying to explain to me what Project Twilight was, I very enthusiastically was like, oh, so they hunt vampires? This guy, his soul aged like several years before my eyes. Put a small note that the very young Project Twilight agents are going to have a different connotation to the nickname than the older ones.
So it's kind of interesting the way Project Twilight is updated. In previous editions, Project Twilight was either highly conspiratorial or relatively powerful, kind of shifting with what our view of various government agencies were. It suggests that the higher-ups in it may be reporting to the technocracy, the Camarilla, Pentax, or any other number of organizations, that they are very interested in psychics, and that it is presumed that they are wound up with the technocracy. What other uses do you see for Project Twilight in the game?
They could be, of course, antagonists for a lot of groups. There are already notes in several groups about Project Twilight being antagonists directly to those groups. But you could also use Project Twilight as looking into other supernatural creatures and trying to figure out even what's going on with their own superiors. It might be a little bit of a cat and mouse game there, because the organizations there are trying to keep the agents infighting with each other and spying on each other to keep them from spying on the higher-ups and noticing what the higher-ups are doing. You could have a Project Twilight where they start to catch on to things that higher-ups are doing and start to notice that, hey, who we're working for is not who we thought we were working for.
Bek, thank you so much for your time. Are there any other projects that you're working on or anything else that you'd like to point our listener towards?
I frequently do art, or actually do visual art with Zach Naldrit, or his Storyteller Vault project. He does some M20 projects. I write for Trinity Continuum, several books in that line. Look out for those.
Bek, thank you so much for your time, and thank you so much for your contribution to Mage 20.
Thank you so much.
This has been Mage the Podcast, where our favorite sorceress affiliation is CNC Music Factory, because they could get you dancing like it was magic. Our executive producers include Jay Widener, Oracle of Conveyance, spelled Khan, which only works to move the Golden Horde; Josh Hillerup, Oracle of the Path of Alchemy, which helps people named Albert pass Chem Labs; Buck Gregory, Oracle of the Path of Healfire, which helps deal with Achilles tendonitis; Christopher Phillips, Oracle of Necronics, which deals with the DC Universe Incarnation of Death; the crew of Erebus, Oracle of the variant of Conveyance that only works on cargo containers; and Mikhail, Oracle of the Path of Healing, which is all about getting your dog to follow you closely. Thank you for your support. Additionally, I'd like to thank our other executive producers: Alex, Alexia, Anders S., Andrew Edelstein, Anand, Badurfi, Berto, Blaze Hibbert, Boo, Boogers, Brad of the Blue, Bryce Perry, Chris B., Daniel Cuppin, Daniel Scribner, Dan Svensson, David Roy, Dennis Osborne, Derek Simsek, Fraggerrock, Gargle Noir, George Laura, Guy Conan Stewart, Ia Bull, Jason Kennedy, Jason Vines, Jason W. Briggs, Jeff Bryn, Jen F., John Magnuson, Jolyn Andes, Joshua Heath, Kathleen Halperin, Chris Kinner, Leslie Weatherstone, Matthew Prohl, Michael Creedle, Michael Parker, Morgan Aran, Nathan Weaver, Nibero, Neil Patterson, Nikita Klaimanov, Oliver Schindler, Patrick McNamara, Patrick Mulder, Puka G, Rachel Grace, Ralph Scheinhammer, Ricardo, Richard Bat Brewster, Robart the Robot, Rob H. Ryan, Kendy, Samuel Tobin, Stephen Carton, Thrice Great, William Connolly, William Martin, and Zach Rules. Our EP shoutout is to Jason Vines, which I assume is actually a sentence, either referring to your fondness for the defunct video service or the method of movement using sentence stems similar to lianas or runners. Vines may climb many ways, such as twining the step around a support, using an adventitious climbing route, using a twining petiole, using tendrils or shoots, leaves, or inflorescences, tendrils with adhesive branches or thorns. Jason, if you use any of these methods of locomotion, you may in fact be a woody shrub, and we look forward to you sharing your wisteria, kiwi fruit, or morning glory blossoms in the Discord. Thank you for your support. If you super like this episode or super didn't, drop us a line at magethepodcast@gmail.com or at magethepodcast on Twitter. We have a hop in Discord community at discord.me/magethepodcast. If you like us, please give us a review on the platform of your choosing or tell a friend about us. Also go to magethepodcast.com for show notes and all of our previous shows. Now go change reality. Bye.